Welcome, everybody, to our webinar today titled Maximizing User Satisfaction, the Advantage of SLOs, SLOs, however you want to call them, over SLAs, another acronym, in measuring customer experience. I am Josh Peterson with Honeycomb, Senior Director of Product Marketing, here with Aaron Short. Aaron, would you give us a quick intro on yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Aaron Short, as just mentioned. I'm an engineering manager at Prove Identity, and I look after our site reliability teams and our data engineering teams.
Awesome. Thank you. It's so awesome to have you here with me. The reason why we have Aaron here today is for two reasons. One, having a customer of Honeycomb just kind of get on a webinar and talk about a topic like this is just so valuable. Two, Aaron is, I consider, my words, an expert in SLOs. And he's got a really cool story to share with us, a really cool perspective on SLAs and SLOs. And so along the way here, Aaron and I are going to kind of bounce off of each other as we go through today. Here's how we're going to roll. Basically, we'll start kind of high level. As mentioned, it's like SLAs. We kind of know what those are. They're old, they're known, et cetera. But we want to kind of set a baseline of SLAs and SLOs, just like kind of what we're talking about today, the strengths, the weaknesses, et cetera. Because we want to bring that down into tying it to the customer experience, right? And that's really going to be the kind of the underlying current of today is how we use SLOs and align those with the customer experience to do a lot of different things, a lot of good, and you'll see there. We'll move into then also engaging engineering teams with SLOs. Some of us on the call and software development teams might already be old hats, old pros at SLOs, like Aaron and his team. Others might be just kind of testing the waters, and yet some of us might have been heard and we want to know more and engage. And there's an element of like how we get our teams to adopt this kind of newish way of doing things. So we'll spend time there. And then move into Aaron. Again, there's a really neat, interesting story that we want to give Aaron some time to talk through just his kind of evolution of, where he's at with Proof, but also before that and moving to SLOs and leveraging SLOs to just make a great experience for his customers, better services, reliability, the whole deal. And real quick at the end, we'll do a quick Q&A. So as you're listening, want to throw some questions into the chat. We'll get to those as best we can toward the end. So Aaron, how you feeling? Ready to go?
Yeah, let's rock.
Awesome. All right. So this is we got to get this out of the way, right? What are SLAs? We're just going to kind of lay the groundwork, a foundation to kind of base our conversation on going forward. So look, high level, we know this. SLAs are an agreement, right? They're a formal agreement. They're in a contract. We sign, our customers sign, or if we are customers, and we all are of other vendors, we sign, right? And it's like, basically, it's that agreement between the service provider and a customer outlines the expected level of service. There's a lot of different levels of service, metrics, responsibilities, and then of course remedies, like what do we do if the service level is not met, right? So SLAs are not new. They've been around. This is the world we live in. We talk about like the scope of these things, and this is really important because again, as we talk about scope, we start talking about like, well, when are they applicable? When do we use them? And as we roll into the customer experience kind of current or vibe here, theme, this becomes much more important. But really, it's just the scope of these, they cover these expectations. Who's responsible for what? Both parties, the service provider, the customer, and what happens if we fail to meet them. Pretty basic, right? Examples. We all know these things. Service availability, uptime, 9s, 3 9s, 4 9s. Like we know all of this. Support response time, basically like, hey, if something happens, these are examples, but like how fast does the team respond? Got it. If we have a failure, right? We have a problem with, let's say, data loss. How soon can my data be recovered? So these are high level. These are commitments that the service provider makes to, or you all make to our customers, or our service providers make to us to make us feel good that there's some threshold, there is some boundary that they're not going to cross. And if they do, of course, we have like consequences, if you will. It's kind of a heavy word, but what happens if we go past those, okay? And so really the focus is it's this contractual agreement so everybody knows where we're at. Now, we know from the perspective of building software and software developers, creating great user experiences, creating services or an application that's reliable and works really great for our customers, there's some limitations of SLAs that we're going to talk through here. First is like the flexibility, right? Think about what an SLA is. It's in a contract. think about what do you got to do to modify a contract to go through legal. It takes weeks, days, months, who knows what. So they're relatively inflexible. Once we define these SLAs, they're rigid. We keep to them. And it's difficult to modify your SLAs as your business change, as the needs of your customers change or the expectations of customers change, right? So they're relatively inflexible. They're kind of set. And then that's just kind of it for the most part. We go back every maybe year or something, or maybe more to revisit them and maybe make an adjustment. Second is they're high level. Well, high level, meaning, again, they typically focus on these high level metrics that, executive decision makers and orgs think about: uptime, response time, right? That's fine, because we need to know that the service we're paying for is going to be reliable to some point. But below that, a lot of times SLAs don't quite capture the details that we as software developers or platform engineers really care about, which is the performance of the service at a level that we know affects user experience, our customers. Okay, so they kind of high level, they're up here. And then third, again, they're contractual. They're not focused on the actual customer. They're not focused on how our service is really being perceived by our customers, hands-on, right? And so there's that aspect, as well as the SLAs don't help us, as engineers or engineering teams to understand what's the strengths and weaknesses of our service to be able to continuously improve, right? And build better customer outcomes. So now let's get Aaron into the mix here. Aaron, curious from your perspective, SLAs, would you add another limitation to this? Would you pick one of these that is the most limiting factor? What do you think?
I think the contractual element of it is probably the bit that's most concerning, and the bit that deviates most away from customer focus. The idea of an SLA is that it's a defensible contract, and the idea of something being defensible implies it's being attacked, and that's not really the relationship you want to have for your customers, right? So they're not attacking you; they're your users. You care about them, or at least you should. So for me, an SLA, while a deeply important document for any relationship, really just means that it's there as the base set. You should always be striving to do more, and good engineering teams will always do more, and good partners will always try and do more. And naturally, because this is written on a piece of paper and renewed annually, semi-annually, biannually, there's that inherent inflexibility, and the rest of the elements start coming in. But just the mere fact that it's a defensible contract means that it leaves you no opportunity to do better or step up.
Great point. Cool. It's an awesome segue into basically why SLOs are so important. And we'll move there now. So we lay out SLAs. Got it. Nothing new for probably anybody listening here. but we got that out of the way. So now let's move into talk about SLOs, service level objectives, right? And again, we'll start kind of the same way, which is let's do just high level definition, right? A lot of different ways to say this, but kind of at the core here, an SLO is really, it's a specific measurable characteristic of the service. And we'll talk about there's a lot of different variations there and opportunities. And really, it just helps us define a target level performance or quality that we as a service provider or our teams aim to achieve. Great, fine. So now what? So talk about scope now. So you go, well, how does an SLO relate to an SLA? Is it part of it? Is it its own thing? Kind of both, right? So SLOs, or as detailed metrics, really can be within an SLA. We might have uptime of, again, 99.9%. Great. But our SLO might be other sort of more targeted granular metrics that us as teams, as engineers and platform engineers want to look at to be sure that we're well below the SLA target. The SLO will help us get there, right? But then the SLOs can also exist independently. They can be their own thing, right? A team who owns a service or multiple services might have any number of SLOs that just are meaningful to them as practitioners who are really trying to craft, shave off milliseconds or reduce error rates or whatever that is, that's only really relevant to them. And here's some basic examples, right? And you see kind of now, as mentioned, the SLAs are high level, right? Now we're getting a little lower. So yeah, uptime is an SLA. That's cool. But we also can have one for SLOs, but look at it now. It's way more granular. It's these 3 nines, but over a month. It's not just in general. It's some time frame. We're adding other dimensions. SLOs allow us to add more dimensions that we don't really have with SLAs. Response time. Again, here's an example, right? Response time less than 200 milliseconds. Great. That's a good one, right? Customer may or may not even want to talk about that, but us as teams, as engineers, we care about that kind of stuff. And error rate, things like this, less than 1% error rate in transactions, right? So again, we're able to stick with these core metrics that matter to us, but we're able to be more granular, bring them down, but also kind of broaden them out and allow our teams, and we'll talk more about that aspect here in a moment, to really kind of craft their own SLOs that work for them. So now, Aaron, how would you say this different, if at all, or add a little color to this kind of definition?
Yeah, when I'm kind of first explaining SLOs to people, or at least trying to imbue the reasoning behind them, I typically describe it as what is a metric, a meter that we can track and measure that when it changes, the material experience for the end user is impacted in some way, and that you can see it and they feel it and experience it. Like uptime is an obvious one. If you arrive on a service and it's not available, it's there. But in more nuanced places like saturation, they may experience queues or wait times, and that is not expressed naturally in an SLA typically. So for me, SLOs are that material effect, and critically, there should be something you do about them too, right? So you don't define a nebulous SLO that even if the experience changed, you can't affect the SLO as well. So it's a two-way street. Both the customer is affected, but the actions you take within your platform have a material impact on the SLO itself. Sometimes good, mostly good, we hope, but also sometimes bad. That's just life running software in the cloud.
Yeah. Great call. And just so much, it's just a whole nother, concept from the SLA. It just allows us to do so much more, as you allude to. So now talk about some benefits here. You kind of got that in that last slide. We teased dance around them a little bit, but just to kind of land this directly. One is, again, we can make these things customer centric. That's the great point of SLOs, is it allows us to really create these performance targets around things that we know our customers care about, or elements of our service that impact the user experience. Again, response time, uptime, error rates, might be others, but really we could really highly focus directly on the customer experience. Second is, as we were just mentioning, is SLOs are very flexible and adaptable, right? We can create one today and we can adjust it in 3 weeks, a month. It doesn't matter. We can always keep tuning these things depending on how our business is changing, our service is changing, needs of our customers, et cetera. So they're very adaptable to just the world around us that is always changing. And this is one of my favorite things about SLOs, working with customers, like Aaron and Prove and others, is like SLOs, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but they allow us to move into a more proactive mindset. SLOs are really good at telling us there's something going on before it gets to a point where it impacts customers, breaches SLAs, et cetera. And that lets us be more proactive versus reactive, and move into that kind of mindset, right? And so that's one of my favorite parts there as well. So Aaron, add some color to this. I mean, do you have a favorite benefit? Would you add another one? What do you think?
No, I think I'd echo your sentiment that the proactivity is probably the biggest gain you can get from it. So your SLO to keep some of the language around SLAs alive, I guess, for a while. SLOs kind of can act like the leading edge for your SLA, if that makes sense. And they kind of cut through noise, and they can cut through a lot of tabulation when they're well formed and well structured, to allow you to get ahead of problems that are rearing behind the scenes. Like the most common example is a slow degradation in latency across a complex network structure in AWS or in Azure or whatever your cloud is of choice. These things happen as your network grows and as more customers begin to hit your endpoints and your load balancers. So that's the kind of thing that can creep up on you and can eventually become critical and go supernova and even outage and an incident. And that's a whole different ball game. That's when your SLA may become a very important document again. But the point is to not get to that critical mass. And I think SLOs as well, like something I like about this whole approach, even just generally, is it normalizes it normalizes problems in a way that are manageable, because we can all sit around and pretend that this document we wrote means that nothing bad is going to happen, but that's not the reality. It's not the experience. It's like it'd be the equivalent to having a breakdown and being on the side of the road, and all you're doing is reading your customer manufacturer warranty for whatever your vehicle is. It's just a waste of time. You need to ring AA. You need to find out what the problem is. It just doesn't track. So for me, I like SLOs because they allow me to just get ahead of problems before they become problems, but also they kind of normalize it a little bit because they're usually reactive. They're usually proactive rather than reactive.
Yep.
They allow you to embed yourself in the experience of the customer, and then when something does go wrong, it's much less scary because in often cases you can see how it got there as well as you track an SLO coming down on the trend. Hopefully that doesn't happen too often, but that's just reality.
Yeah, I love that. We all know that the demands of customers using our applications is just, I mean, we're all users of applications too, and we have high demands. So the ability for, teams to, like you said, get in front of a issue before it becomes, as you said, supernova, which we all understand what that means. We never want to get there. Is just key. It's key for the business. It's key for our peace of mind as practitioners. It's just nothing but good. And it's, of course, then like for the customer experience. So that proactive piece is just, we can't really talk enough about it, obviously. Okay. So now kind of lay it out. SLAs got it. SLOs, we get this baseline of kind of definition here. Now let's move into the next two areas, right? One is how we tie this now, how we tie SLOs to the customer experience, right? How we set, we monitor, how we analyze these performance metrics to really like understand how customers interact with. And I like the idea of this word of perceive the service, right? Because there is this element of the reality of numbers like latency, there's a numbers or throughput, et cetera. But then there's the perception to the customer as well, which I really like that idea. Now we'll launch into this to see how we tie this together. Now, you can look at this as like best practices or how you might do this. But the way we're going to do it is we're going to take these kind of 6 different steps, if you will. If you're starting out with SLOs, let's say, or you're going to craft a new one and you're an old pro like Aaron with SLOs, here's a kind of an approach you might take, right? And so Aaron and I'll kind of talk through these things together to kind of step us through. So again, focusing on how we craft these SLOs to align with the customer experience. First step, as you'd imagine, is like, well, what's the metric? What do we care about? What do our customers care about, right? So like this, what's the KPI? What's this key customer experience metrics we need to basically create an SLO around and track, right? Could be availability, response time, reliability, or scalability. And so Aaron, I'll just ask you as we go through each of these 6 here, add a little color to this. I mean, is this an easy one? Does this take time and energy to like figure this out? Or anything to add to this first one?
This one, frankly, just requires you to know your product and know how, what I said earlier of like how something will materially impact the customer. There's some stuff is really obvious, like latency is super obvious, but like saturation is really not very obvious at all. And it's the one that's often forgotten and kind of left on the deck. So KPIs can also, for me, they're analogous to service level indicators. And I know we're starting to run into a lot of SLs, but that really it's a reflection, a metered reflection of your application and how it impacts the customer is then the SLO captured on top of that.
Got it. So we get these kind of KPIs, key metrics. Great. Got them. And we all have a list of those. Then we move into, okay, we're going to wrap this now. We're going to wrap these into an SLO, right? We're going to define a clear and measurable SLO. And after, I think it's this slide, maybe the next, we're going to have Aaron kind of talk us through one of these things. So when we talk about like defining a measurable SLO, like we'll show you what that kind of looks like and talk through it. But now it's like, hey, we're uptime SLO. We have an error rate SLO or a response time SLO as example. So Aaron, any color to anything to add on this?
Yeah, this is where we start to kind of get into the, I suppose to use an Irish colloquialism, the meat and potatoes of tracking and monitoring, I guess, or observability as the greater discipline it's now become. The maybe one part we leave out on this is actionable. So a clear and measurable SLO means it's inherently actionable. There is something you can do to respond. It's not always easy, right? But there is something you can do, hopefully automated. But we all dream. But at this point, you've started to describe really what it is I see on my side and you've put it together with what the customer will see on the other side. And the reach through, particularly for anybody in the B2B to C business, like Prove is deeply, deeply important, because what you export out may not be what the customer receives on their end. And triaging that in heat of the moment is hard when you haven't defined clear and measurable SLOs.
Awesome. So helpful. So we move down this kind of path, right? We define our SLOs, we get them built out, and they're active. Cool. Well, now we monitor, right? That's the next step. And we're excited because now we have these SLOs telling us something. We're tracking some metric, and there's different ways to do that depending on the tool you're using, the platform, a monitoring tool, dashboards, alerts. I want to ask Aaron something specifically on this. Like, I'm curious for you and your team. You could set up an SLO and just be always watching it, actively going in there. Where was it at? Or you could wait for an alert, right? We have the concept of like burn down alerts, where it's going to tell you, it's going to alert if it's getting close, if we're getting close to exceeding some threshold. Great. So how do you monitor these things? Do you watch actively, or do you kind of wait for the SLO to like, hey, tell you or send you an alert to then jump in and take a look?
For us, we're trying to do a bit of both, if I'm honest with you. Like, so in our human kind of habitual process, we'll monitor a Slack channel here and there that we receive proactive alerting from. And usually those are sensitive alerts, or like truthfully not our well-defined SLOs, the ones we're still tweaking, still figuring out, that maybe don't reflect or are too noisy. And that's an experience that anybody leading an engineering team is going to have to really tease out over a long period of time, because it really sucks to get woke up at 1 a.m. because your alert is a little bit oversensitive, but that's just life again. So there's that scenario, but we also stage our alerts a little bit. So what we do is we have alerts that go off, when we're 2 days out, when we're a day out, when we're 4 days out from this being a problem, 4 hours out, sorry, not 4 days. And we kind of keep this creeping to the edge. And it also allows us to keep on top of things as well, because there are certain things that can happen that don't need to be addressed right away. And that was kind of what I was touching on about normalizing problems. There's degradations, upgrades, running out of space, God forbid, a memory leak, not that we have them, but these things exist, and you just sometimes have to do something about it eventually. And when you've defined really great alerts, then you get into the sweet spot of, well, can my Kubernetes orchestration respond to this in an automatic way? And all I need to do is just check or approve or put a light hand on the wheel. So that's the kind of North Star for us.
Yeah, awesome. So we're monitoring, great. But then over time, it's like one of the neat aspects of SLOs is like we're tracking a certain metric over time. And that gives us the ability to analyze, right? Look back, look at trends, correlate with things like customer feedback, correlate, error rate with, deployments of some certain service. Like the SLOs, they allow us to now kind of granularly look back and understand this metric over time, to basically, and maybe even perform root cause analysis on certain elements. We're like that we don't really know day to day, but looking back and analyzing this SLO data gives us new insight into like kind of what's going on with our service. So for you guys, Aaron, I mean, is this like a time based? Do you do this monthly, quarterly, randomly? Like, how does this analysis part go for you guys?
There's a couple different there's a legacy way of doing it, which I think is, somebody goes in and crawls a dashboard or, some kind of graph that you've constructed monthly. And we'll have members of the team that might do that when they're doing specific research on a problem. Otherwise, we generally think and reflect the enshrined production meeting model that Google formatted in their original SRE book, in the sense that we have a weekly check-in, which seems like a regular enough cadence. For the most part, that's just the SRE team that attend that. And then at less regular intervals, we invite both product and engineering to attend. And we air our dirty laundry there a little bit, where we go, hey, look, this is what this has been like for us. And this is particularly relevant when we exhaust our error budgets. This usually is where this comes up, in those kind of regular intervals. Otherwise, weekly, we do that human-based check-in where we just all get together, whoever has been on call for the week, and we talk about inbound requests that we've had, but also what's the performance like of our alerts. Crucially, we highlight during these meetings when we change these.
Yeah. Nice. That's great feedback because it's again, there's no like right way to do it. It's just what suits your team and like your availability and bandwidth, and just get into a routine where you guys are extracting like insights, if you will, out of this SLO data to help you just make decisions going forward. So that's kind of this next one too, which just allows you to iterate and improve kind of high level. But looking back at your SLO data, we could see how you might want to adjust them. Again, back to that flexibility. SLOs, these are knobs and dials. Ultimately, we can adjust and tune, right? But also, it allows us to see improvements to code we might want to make, right? It might be like, we're seeing tech debt kind of exposed here based on what we're seeing with this SLO. It might inform future, sprint planning, or even just process improvements for maybe how we deploy, et cetera. So, any examples, Aaron, that you have top of mind around like the idea of iterating and improving based on learnings from your SLOs?
Yeah, I mean, like the most obvious example and the thing we came across at first was noisy alerts, or alerts that didn't trigger, actually, which are even more important, is an alert we expected to stand by us. That has happened, especially in a transitionary period. Anybody coming from what I consider like the first generation or legacy monitoring and stepping into the observability or the wider sphere of observability will have this experience where they had an alert they crafted based on hopefully an SLO, which was backed by an SLI and maybe captured in an SLA, but that really didn't stand by and perform the way they expected. So tweaking that is a super obvious one. But what you touched on a second ago, which is, going in and making a specific change, it's not just, and this is something especially in the world of tracing that we've come across, it's not just going in and saying, hey, I need to fix this problem because it showed up on our SLO. We had a high latency in the database connection somewhere in a call. That's one thing. But the one that we got was, I'm missing an essential piece of information in my trace here that I really need to go in and get. And being proactive about that is one of the most valuable things you can do. And really enshrining that process and encouraging your engineers to go seek more data is really valuable, because some people will just increase the frequency in which you report, which has its value, but actually being thoughtful in the same way you've been thoughtful about your SLOs, about what you're trying to see, will reflect much better in your SLOs.
Yeah, nice. And kind of the sixth and last one here is, SLOs give us a different way to communicate with customers. Again, maybe not every customer wants to talk about the depths of, I don't know, like 200 millisecond response times, but we have the SLA, great, but it allows us in certain instances in having customer conversations where we could be a little bit more transparent with the level of performance of our service. We can incorporate some of this into actual SLA language we see, but also reporting, like, a quarterly business review with one of your top customers who's really keen to understand, like, at beyond the SLA kind of high level, more the depths of how your services is performing for them, or specifically for them, like with their data, their users. It allows us to basically extract that data, use it, and communicate differently, with customers. So, Aaron, any color to add on this one, the communication piece?
Yeah, like in the ideal world, the SLA document that we've talked about before is just a collection of the SLOs your engineering team and your platform team and your SRE team crafted. That's not reality in most cases. But you may find that, in the world of problems, when they do occur and you're on a call with a customer, wee o'clock in the morning, and it's a little bit testy, you are able to communicate the experience a little bit easier based on what you're seeing. If you have like a clear line of definition of, look, this is what we're expecting to see, and we are or are not seeing that. And it's much easier, particularly when you get into the big customer relationships, it's much easier to communicate through these lines with them. And again, it's a lot more soft language. You're not saying, hey, look, this is what my SLA said, therefore I'm not having a conversation with you. You're kind of wearing your heart on your sleeve a little bit. You're like, hey, look, this is what we are expecting, and we're seeing what we're expecting, or we're not. So you can get a lot more out of people. It's a little bit more human approach. It's not just more human for your customers, but it's more human for your team and how they interact with others and communicate with others about problems.
Yeah. It's a great point. It does kind of allow that more human, like person to person, like reality of, take the contract aside. Let's just talk about what's really happening, and here it is. So I'm with you there. Okay, so now Aaron has been nice enough to share one of his SLOs that he has his team have it approved. And we're sharing this because I'd love, Aaron, if you can kind of talk us through this, that 6-step state, process we kind of went through, if that's what you want to call it. Ultimately, we end up with something like this, right? And so take us through like what you have here. Just describe this and let us know what and why and how, if you would.
Yeah, I've obfuscated a few things out of this. When I advocate we share a dirty laundry, not all of it, right? So this is obviously a well-performing SLO in most cases. At this kind of cadence, when we're targeting, 3 nines in this case, you're probably looking less than an hour of downtime and a 30 or unavailability or problem state, as we call it, over the course of a month. So what is this SLO? Well, if you look in the top left corner, it's a wonderful SLO written by Mr. Niall Dugera. He's an engineering manager now that I work with. He was an engineer at the time I was writing this, so well, congrats to him on his promotion as well. But our target is 99% here, and it's over a period of 30 days. And then we have an SLI underneath. Now, I won't bore people with the details of the SLI because it's hyper specific to our business. MFA is multi-factor authentication, as anybody might have guessed, and Prove has a product that does this. I think the really neat bits for us and what makes this so good is, one, the SLI is hyper specific to the use case. So it's laser focused on this is a performance within our application load balancers based around latency. Right, we have a latency target, which I can't share with people. Sorry. If you're a customer, you can. So if anybody's looking, head to prove.com and sign up, and then maybe we can have a conversation about this. And we just launched our new self-service project. Just nice plug there. But anyway, we've 2 real nice things to attach this first, right? One is budget burn down. So this is the, I talked about that if you're targeting 99%, actually, in this case, I think that's about seven and a bit hours of downtime. I remember my mappings between my nines. Anybody doing this a lot will start to see those numbers in their sleep. But it's about 7 hours of interrupt or problem state. So at 87%, we have an abundance of that 7 hours left. We have, quite a lot of that there. That means, and I touched on this a little bit, we can normalize this being a problem. The latency can creep up ever so slightly, as long as it doesn't go into a breaking state and we have another alert and another SLO for breaking state. This is when the latency goes so far, we can't go any further. That's a separate thing. For this specific one, this is the alert that allows us to be proactive. This is what allows us to drive the conversation. And you can then see the other really neat component, which I touched on before in the top right corner, which is the alert types. So in Honeycomb, anybody familiar with a product will see this. I have 2 4-hour alerts. And when it gets to that 4 hours, we blast a lot of things because now we have 4 hours to fix a problem. Like in 4 hours, we will not have, actually at 4 hours, we only have 4 hours of our 7 hours left, essentially, if the maths check out. Nobody checked me on that. And at that point, we need to take action. And that means we're proactive. But actually, the customer hasn't been affected yet. We haven't breached our SLA, the document behind it. And actually, this is more aggressive than what's in most of our contracts with our customers. Actually, all of our contracts with our customers. The 24-hour alert is the sweet spot for us. That hits a Slack channel that's constantly monitored by the on-call team during normal working hours. And it pretty much guarantees that unless it's Saturday night, we're going to see this. And that's because we follow the sun model. So unless it's Saturday night, someone is going to see this in Slack and can make a human deterministic decision based on how this is being affected. So, if it's steadily coming down and there's no stopping that ramp down, and the graph on the left is just flat, heading towards flatline, right, we need to take action. But if it's like plateauing and like every, 5 hours, which is something that's happened, this kind of creeps down and then goes level and then comes down, we can honestly decide whether not to get someone up at stupid o'clock on Sunday to do it. And we can just eat the cost until Monday. Because again, we've defined this as, this isn't quite the customer is hurting, but if we don't address it, they will hurt. That's the proactivity model. And it's a little bit of a misnomer that we say SLOs reflect the customer experience. They do, but a really, really good SLO reflects the customer experience when it's tied to an alert before they actually start to feel the pain. So that's that's the structure. It's a really cool layer. Props to Niall for crafting this. It's based on the four golden signals, again from Google's SRE book, which is one of the, I suppose, rubrics we used when we were moving from our legacy first generation monitoring into what we now consider like our first foray into modern observability. So it's not so much about the tool, but the philosophy of how we're actually tracking our product.
Yeah, I love it. I love like the safety net, kind of like that 20 window where it's just like, hey, there's something going on. Make whoever's on call, look at this, take a read, make a decision if it's something we really need to dive into. Oh no, it's not. But then you got that 4 hour. You always have that kind of extra buffer of like, oh, well, there's a problem happening here. We really need to jump into it. So it just allows you guys to be a little bit more, even more proactive, because you give yourself a full 24 hours and another countdown to like, the potential supernova event. Okay, awesome, Aaron. Now, building SLOs, how we do it. There's an example there. Now, there's another interesting aspect that, Aaron, I know you're keenly passionate about, which I really appreciate, which is, as mentioned earlier, is like getting our teams involved. And if you're using them today, you're excited, great. If you are just dabbling and you want to do more, there might be like a lot of folks we don't have the tools for this. We don't have SLOs yet. And it's kind of a mindset shift, right? There's a new way of doing things. There's like a new paradigm for our teams to learn and understand, to really get behind, to then adopt SLOs, to really feel the power and the value that they provide. And so this next kind of section is just like how we engage teams in the SLO process again. So we'll kind of talk to these 4 different bits, and we'll start with this. Is like one way to approach this is like setting goals, right? It's like I was looking at this, and of course, Aaron knows much more than I, but see that word collaborative. Like the neat thing about SLOs is like I have my team, let's say I'm working on a service and we have our own goals. Cool. But my service and let's say Aaron's service or another service, other different teams, they're all going to tie together probably at some point, right? And make like a workflow or make some area of the app. So we all have skin in the game. And so there's the element of like collaboration where we can set these goals together, defining SLOs that represent the entire user experience. Now we can also do our own for our own team, our own service for sure. But there's this element of collaboration that SLOs like enable here. So Aaron, jump into this, please, and add some color.
Yeah, I mean, the way this materializes at Prove and has in other roles I've had previously has been through a process we call the production readiness review. And the PRR will mean a million different things to a million different teams. It's much more ambiguous, I guess, than an SLO is. That usually has one meaning. But for us, this is a deeply collaborative getting ready to go to production thing. It's the most obvious when it's a net new thing. We also do it for stuff that's changing deployment type, maybe moving from non-containerized to containerized environment. In our cases, might be moving from a data center into the cloud. There's a lot of ways this can manifest, but that process in no substitute, and there is no magic bullet, is sitting down with product and engineering, who hopefully are the same team, and like genuinely just understanding how it works and helping them craft it. Now, the dream world is they come up with themselves, which is super proactivity and does exist, especially as we get further and further into this kind of modern suite of observability tools. But at least over the last 5 years, this has still been on the fringe, I guess, a little bit in many mainstream big businesses. So for Prove, this means we have to make an active effort, and you have to go out and it's hard work, and you have to learn what the product does and then help them write a specific SLI and then craft an SLO from that. So there's no substitute for hard work and getting to know people when it comes to this one.
Yeah, great. Second is, communicating importance. Again, I think when engineering teams use SLOs, you see the importance pretty quickly. But for folks who, it's new, bringing them into the fold, it's really helpful when we're communicating the importance. And that's showing them, like proving as Aaron's walking us through one of his SLOs, you really clearly see the connection you can make between their service and performance of their service and the impact on customer experience. So really helping engineers understand that this is like basically brings them closer almost to the customer experience, So Aaron, I mean, how have you seen kind of doing this work well with either new engineers and new teams who are just adopting SLOs?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when they have a hand on the wheel, it's much easier for folks to determine what's important and not. I think when there's this disassociative nature, folks can take a bit laissez-faire or maybe a shotgun approach where they just aim in the sky and fire, and whatever lands. I've certainly seen that in the past, and it can create the opposite problem, which I hope not many people have, which is just this overabundance of signal that is impossible to respond to and ends up as a needle in a haystack. But by making it hyper focused and important, and asking people, would you go on call for this? You really communicate that there's no wiggle room in this. This is legit. We stand behind this, and it means you stand behind it together in a well structured functional org.
Yep. And engineers respond to that. I've noticed too from our customers who came in and like kind of net new to SLOs and saw that and felt it, and then like you said, they feel it pretty quickly. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, like the ability to look back and analyze our SLO data, but really integrating our learnings and insights into feedback loops, right? Establishing feedback loops, performance reviews, just like making SLOs and the data that we can gain from tracking this over time, making that like a real solid and consistent input into our engineering planning and just feedback loops. So how do you all use this, like incorporating SLOs into feedback loops, prove?
Yeah, it's well, as I mentioned before, our production meetings and our weekly check-in with the SRE team in particular is where this manifests most obviously. Where it's perhaps a little bit less obvious is the balance we strike between accountability and maybe weaponization a little bit. Because when you clearly define a performance indicator, anybody who's been through a professional performance review, you would dream to have indicators in your professional performance review as clear as SLOs, right? That would be the dream scenario. It doesn't exist. It's much more loose. But if you did, there would be a concern that it could be weaponized against you. And you really have to be careful not to do that with teams. It's not about communicating, well, you promised me this wouldn't have a problem, and it would beat this benchmark or this threshold. It's really more about an accountability aspect more than anything else, that they feel, and that's what I meant by the disassociation aspect. They feel accountable when there is a problem or a degradation in performance in some way, and when it's so clear and so obvious in an SLO, it can be hard to push back on it as an engineer when someone's coming to you and saying, hey, look, we agreed this, it's not there. And that is a little bit touching on what SLAs do, the experience does be like for people. But it's, again, if you're taking a human approach and you've thought about it and you're just a good person working with your teammates, it's a great way to set up. And again, when you've normalized problems, because they are normal and they happen all the time, it's not the big scary knock on the door. Yeah. Like when InfoSec comes knocking sometimes, right? You're at a company and InfoSec knock on the door. You're like, oh my God, what's happening? What have I done? Close my laptop immediately. You're wondering did I click that email? Did I report that phishing alert? That kind of thing. But it's that human approach. And ironically, actually prove, obviously in the business that we are, our InfoSec team are just as human and have created this association between our engineering teams as well. So it proves this works. If it's starting to spread just outside of reliability, this means that this definitely is starting to grow legs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. And then finally, we talk about the ability to recognize and kind of reward engineering for getting on board, for not just adopting, but really achieving and exceeding their targets. One thing here at Honeycomb is, SLO is a big key feature and capability of ours, but we dog food that, meaning our team uses our own SLO product all the time. And I see in Slack channels, just monitoring where, we're using our own SLOs to improve our experience for our customers. One of the things that we are really keen on is and I think Aaron knows this, is we pride ourselves on really fast query results. Throw a ton of data at Honeycomb, you don't expect the results to come back so fast. And they do. And our team is constantly shaving milliseconds here and there to constantly improve that experience. Because when you get that data as fast feedback results through Honeycomb, it's kind of mind blowing a little bit. And so we're absolutely using this here. Do you have any kind of, recognition, or do you guys applaud or celebrate reaching, exceeding targets, or even using your SLOs to really continue to really refine and optimize your service, Aaron?
Yeah, I guess I this is the area where it's the least obvious for me, like transparently. I mean, I always make sure I bring chocolate over to the teams I like when I'm traveling. So we've some good chocolate in Ireland, and I'm always making sure to reward the relationships, even in a small tokenized way, right? So that's the human interaction element. That, and I get to pick up the chocolate when I'm away too. So there's a bit of selfishness there. But where we probably this manifests most, and it's really not obvious, is we just have time for people that engage with the process more than we do people who don't. And thankfully at Prove everybody does. It's not a mandate or a directive. This is just obvious for people, so they engage and they've lived the experience of when you don't do it this way. So they generally, we don't really have the opposite problem, but it means that when teams have an ask and it manifests somewhere else in our platform engineering aspect or in the data engineering team, we have time for people because we can see they're genuinely concerned about the problems we have. Because at the end of the day, if you're running a modern site reliability organization, you're normally the first person paged. Like one of these goes off, and I worked with an engineering team that MFA alert we seen goes off. I'm getting woke up. One of my engineers is getting woke up, and the red cord could be pulled that we page an SME out, and it's one of those engineers that helped craft this so that we can take specific action together if the platform itself can't resolve the issue. And that process is where that recognition and reward, I think, comes across in a just frankly a healthy work environment, and the odd bit of chocolate as well.
That's great. Absolutely. I mean, SLOs, it's fun talking through this because from the outside looking in, you hear about what an SLO is. You're like, okay, that's cool. I can monitor my service better. But really, there's so much more depth to this as we talk about just this slide alone. It's like there's so much good, if you will, that can come out of this for our engineering team, for our process, just for our culture, and we see that a lot at Honeycomb and our customers, just as you're saying. So it's really there's a lot of depth here to these SLOs. Okay, Aaron, as we get close to wrapping up here, I would love for you just to give us a couple minutes, if you would, because you know so much about SLOs. This is such a fun conversation, but you weren't always in SLO land. You didn't start your career with SLOs in your back pocket as a tool. Give us you have this interesting transition from doing this type of stuff with another way to then wanting SLOs, but not having SLOs, then finally you do have SLOs. So kind of take us this kind of mini evolution from where you were to where you are today, if you would. I'd love to hear the story.
Yeah, sure. So I started my career as a software engineer. I'm a graduate of Dublin Institute of Technology, which is now TU Dublin. It's changed. It's been that long. And computer science. So I'm from, I would have been on the other side of the fence, I guess, so to speak, in the old school way of doing things. When lines were much more delineated. And at the times we would try and craft functional metrics and alerting to try and figure out what was going on with our product and our suite. And this happened at all the companies I worked at. I've worked at, Workday, Workhuman, a lot of works. There's a lot of SLs, there's a lot of works kicking around now. I suppose where it came to head for me was when I joined Riot Games, which was a very different model to how Prove works and a very different experience of how Prove worked, where Prove maybe, if we were transparent, had under visibility into its platform. Riot Games had very much over visibility, and it was that shotgun laissez-faire approach of how do you do that. And ironically, this works both ways. When you're underdeveloped, you can see a path forward, but for me it first became the obvious path when I moved into this space, when there was just this overdevelopment, and I had to figure out if I reassemble these into something that can be read and understood and gives force feedback, what does that look like? And what is the structure of it? And up until that point, I'd always associate SLAs with just being that contractual element, that thing that we weaponized against one another in the corporate world. And I never gave thought to the SLO and the SLI. So I went off, I read Google's book. I got to meet up with a dear friend of mine, my first manager actually out of college. who had then moved on to Google, which is Dublin's a very small place and was only down the road from me. So I had to go visit the office, get to know what his team is like, what their experience is like, how they're making sense of orders of magnitude of data. So it was that experience that led me here, and then it was much more. I'd love to tell you that was it made sense, and I knew what the answer was straight away. It really wasn't that experience. It's now, well, what do you do? And again, kind of leaned into the experience of like, what are the most common signals, the SLIs, that we can feed into this, and that's where we landed on latency, traffic, errors, and saturation as kind of the four we would lead with. Now, of course, there's hyper focused, as I mentioned with MFA earlier. There's a hyper focused alert or indicator you can craft that's super associated with just your product, but these generally manifest in a hyper focused way also. So when you have these kind of catch-all SLOs, it's a little bit of a misnomer because it makes it seem like you're doing that shotgun approach again, but you're not, right? But the SLOs then can allow you to see multiple manifestations. So database latency won't just show up in your database to microservice communication and back and forth. So this whole thing, frankly, just overloaded me at the time. And, I had been experimenting with our legacy products at Riot Games, and that's very much where I kind of started to think about this as like the first generation or the old school way of monitoring. And then we acquired a new product, and we went on the hunt. And that's actually when I first came across Honeycomb. I was at a conference around open telemetry, which anybody watching this, I deeply hope you're familiar with the project, contributing and engaged. It's a wonderful project that really is starting to show its value, I think. I got to meet Charity. There's a copy of the book behind me. I got some amazing stickers. Really great experience, and not a sales pitch at all. It was really just reaffirming and actually introducing me to more formalized ways of thinking about this, because the way I came at it was just trying to solve a problem, and that can be quite loose. Anybody who's gone through this experience of engineering knows that, you may land at something well defined, but the journey to get there is not that. So that was a wonderful experience. Then we ended up not using Honeycomb at Riot Games all that much, transparently. And during my time there, I really enjoyed the experience I had. We leaned deeply into open telemetry and got to work on some amazing tools and really formulate ourselves around this problem. I left Riot Games, and then when I was interviewing at Prove, it was so funny. I applied to the job because it was basically the same job description as what I was doing at Riot Games, and I felt like I hadn't finished the job there, and I wanted to go finish the job naturally. And when I interviewed with Adrian Fahal, who's my boss, he's the VP of Platform Engineering, wonderful guy, we joked, and it was much more like a conversation about rather than an interview. But it was that first conversation we joked. I was saying, I wanted to use Honeycomb. I've been interested in open telemetry. This big area for me. I'm super, super keen on it. And they dropped the bomb. We use Honeycomb here. And I was like, Grant, that's easy. That's one problem I don't have to solve, right? Of course, we've loads of other problems we have to solve because that's business and that's life. But it did, I'm not saying Honeycomb made me want to join Prove by any means, all right? That's not what this is. But it did show me one thing about Adrian that I think he has imbued in his team and done a wonderful job of, which is the way of thinking about this problem is at every layer of how we implement and orchestrate our business. So we have a bunch of internal customers as a platform team, and we don't directly interface with the customers, so to speak, but we have our own customers and we have an SLA around them. Like, we have requests that come in and we have 24 hours, and we sometimes have that weaponized against us, and sometimes it sucks, and that's life. But we have an SLO, which is far more aggressive, easier to track, and we're exactly as proactive about it in a functional capacity as we are the ones we craft in Honeycomb that are serving our end users daily at a massive scale. So that's the journey, I guess. And to kind of round this conversation out a little bit, or round the story out, this is really what happens when you move from that kind of first generational peeking through the letterbox monitoring, is the way I kind of thought about it, to this observability world. And we're starting to peak in this space a little bit too, where we have so many signals and so many forms of signals. We've traditional metrics and logs, but also tracing has become a huge proponent of modern observability. or component, sorry. And now we need to start making sense of it. And, in the world of increasingly tight budgets and vendor relationships and all this kind of thing, and everybody's been asked to do more and less as times move forward, we need to be really strategic and focused about how we're measuring and how we're doing this. And again, just in the same way SLOs was about getting to a modern place, I see SLOs as driving that next step as well, of how do I get more from less? And this will manifest very obviously now in sampling with the introduction of AI tools and seeing it roll out into vendor tools. I think we're going to get even more from this. I don't know how I don't exactly know how it's going to go, but I see SLOs still being at the leading edge as they are for us every day.
Awesome. Great perspective and great story. I appreciate you sharing that with us, Aaron. The origin story is always cool to see where we came from to get to where we are today. With that, it's a great way to wrap up. We're out of time for questions. So we threw something in the chat. Thank you. We'll try to address those and connect back with you. But I want to say thank you so much, Aaron, for being here today. Just a wonderful conversation. Love just the interaction. Love your just sharing real world, boots on the ground experience with SLOs. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It was wonderful to speak. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to send them on to us. Happy to speak about this, especially driving the community.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And hope you have a great week and take care.